I went into this show knowing that the writers were not going to be faithful to canon. After all, George Lucas even said that Obi-Wan and Vader never fought until they met once again on the Death Star. But I didn't fully anticipate just how far the writers were willing to go breaking existing canon, because as it turns out, they didn't just break it, they shattered it. And while there were a lot of problems with The Last Jedi and the sequel trilogy in general, I think that this series, and specifically this episode, has done even more damage to Star Wars continuity. Not only has this series done irrevocable damage to Obi-Wan and Vader, it now has also done even more to Luke and Leia. I'll talk about Luke Skywalker and his situation later on in this video, but for now, let's take a quick look at what's going on with Leia. During the first movie, A New Hope, she sends a message to Obiwan Kenobi asking for his help, and she talks to him as if she has never met him and that she only knows him through her father. Now, of course, this could be some sort of a ruse to hide her connections to him, but that doesn't change the fact that upon Obi-Wan's death, Leia doesn't show any signs of grief or loss or sadness in any way, and the only emotion that she shows in the slightest is a little bit of support towards Luke and his connection with Obiwan Kenobi. But after watching this series, that doesn't make any sense. Throughout this series, and by the end of this episode, Obi-Wan and Leia have gone through a whole bunch of different situations that have been very trying and dangerous, and as a result, they have culminated a very strong bond of friendship. These two care very much about each other. For Leia to just casually dismiss Obi-Wan's death during the movie A New Hope, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. How can the writers possibly explain why Leia would have no grief whatsoever at the loss of Obi-Wan, a man who saved her life multiple times? And the situation with Luke is just as infuriating, but we'll get into that later. Obi-Wan is bad. Episode 6. We open with yet another one of those truly absurd woke weirdo power fantasies. This time it's a white guy who's pushing around and bullying some random brown people. That is, of course, until Reva shows up and the white guy gets put in his place by strong black female character. It's so blatant and pathetic. No one wants to see this garbage.
This is terrible.
Anyways, Reva talks to one of the merchants and says that she's looking for one of the farmers named Owen. And then the scene cuts away to Vader on his Imperial cruiser, and he's chasing the transport shuttle that had managed to escape in the last episode. Alright, hold on a second here, because this doesn't sound right. These two scenes are happening simultaneously, and it's been, at most, just a couple hours since the end of the previous episode. Vader's cruiser is still chasing the transport shuttle, which doesn't have access to hyperdrive, so they're probably still in that solar system, so how exactly did Reva make it all the way to Tatooine in that span of time? How is it that she seems to be almost fully recovered from her injury? And for that matter, how did she even get to Tatooine to begin with? Was Vader being very considerate and just left a high-speed ship on the planet for her to use? What the hell is going on here?
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
This is an issue that I talked about already in a previous video, where the show creators treat the start of an episode as if it's just a completely clean slate, and they can do absolutely anything they want. They act as if what happened between those two episodes is completely unimportant, no matter how ridiculous it happens to be. And this current situation is entirely implausible. There is simply no way that Reva could have healed and made it to Tatooine in just the span of a few hours without even having access to a ship.
It never happened. No way. It never happened.
Regardless, the transport ship that Obi-Wan is on has been damaged, and the rebel leader guy needs some time to fix it. So Obi-Wan comes up with the plan of giving himself up in order to buy time for the others to escape. Where have I seen this before? Oh yeah, it sounds familiar because it was the exact same plan they had in the previous episode.
Oh, not this again.
Back on the best planet ever and capital of the universe, Tatooine, the merchant from the previous scene goes and finds Owen and tells him that an Inquisitor has returned and that she is looking for him. Owen heads back to his farm, where he tells Beru about the situation and that they need to leave. Which leads into a fantastic opportunity for the writers to ruin two more characters. This time it's Owen and Beru, where Beru has always been previously a loving, motherly character and supportive, yet now the show just wants to turn her into random, extremely bossy, super strong feminist woman. and Owen becomes a bitch.
You're a man when I tell you you're a man.
So Bossy Beru tells Owen that they're not going to leave, and in fact, they will stay at the farm to defend it. He then suggests that they should go and get help, which would be a very good idea considering the person coming after them is a dark side force user, except Aunt Beru refuses and says that she won't put anyone else in danger, and that just the two of them are enough to deal with the Inquisitor.
Lady, you got a screw loose.
So it seems that Disney is determined to ruin every single character within this franchise. But don't worry, it gets worse, because now it's time for Obi-Wan to get torn down even more. This time it's the rebel leader guy talking down to him about Obi-Wan's plan. He essentially accuses Obi-Wan of wanting to be selfish for, get this, being willing to sacrifice himself to save others.
What a story.
What makes this even dumber is after Obi-Wan gets insulted, he in turn just praises the rebel guy for being such a strong leader and actually starts giving him compliments and telling him that everyone's gonna look up to him. Why?
I am insulted on your behalf.
For those at home not keeping track, we're not even 10 minutes into the episode, and there has already been not one, not two, but 3 separate scenes that were just essentially woke weirdo power fantasy nonsense. It's like they realized they hadn't quite hit their woke quota for the series yet, and just needed to pack a bunch of that bullshit into the final episode. I could have sworn that this show was supposed to be about Star Wars, but instead it sounds like a lecture from a blue-haired gender studies professor.
You hear that, Rosen? We're having fun. Oh. Hey, I'm not having fun.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Obi-Wan gets into a smaller ship that had been inside the shuttle and takes off in a different direction, hoping that Vader will follow in the Imperial cruiser. The Grand Inquisitor correctly points out that taking out the Rebel network is very important, but Vader decides to chase Obi-Wan instead. Now, I should mention that this is an Imperial cruiser, which carries over 1,000 smaller ships. And sure, while many of those will be TIE fighters, there's also going to be a lot of other kinds of ships as well, like the Imperial shuttles. Even still though, since this chase is not occurring at light speed, those TIE fighters could still be used to harass the Rebel ship and try to destroy it, then getting picked up by the Imperial cruiser at a later point in time. Those TIE fighters can survive on their own for quite a while, even though they're just short-range fighters. So, the smartest course of action would be to launch as many smaller ships as possible to continue chasing the Rebels, trying to destroy that transport shuttle, while Vader chases Obi-Wan in the cruiser itself. But thanks to the incompetent writers, apparently Vader and everyone else on the Imperial cruiser just forgot about those other 1,000 ships that they could have used.
Give me something for the pain and let me die.
Obi-Wan heads to a nearby planet, which must still have been in that same solar system since the chase hadn't been occurring at light speed and they weren't able to actually travel in between the stars, and this just further proves that it's only been a couple hours at most, and that Ririva making it all the way to Tatooine is absurd.
Lie to yourself if you must, but not to me.
Vader says that he's going to go down to the planet and face Obi-Wan alone, which is going to lead to another fight between Obi-Wan and Vader, despite the fact that George Lucas explicitly said that these two didn't see each other at all between the time of The Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. But hey, whatever, throw out the canon, who cares? But remember, the writers on this show actually said they perfectly adhered to canon. During the fight, Vader manages to knock Obi-Wan into a large hole in the ground and then starts throwing boulders on top of him to try and crush Obi-Wan. Vader then says a couple of taunts and walks away, believing that Obi-Wan is dead. And right away, everyone who's a Star Wars fan is probably saying, hang on a second, that doesn't make any sense, because Vader has a connection to Obi-Wan through the Force. They can sense each other when they're nearby. They even did this in an earlier episode of this series. So Vader would absolutely have been able to sense that Obi-Wan was still alive, and there was no reason for him to have believed that Obi-Wan was dead and then just walk away.
Danny kind of forgot it.
But as we've already seen, the writers on this series are certainly not fans of Star Wars, and they definitely don't have the slightest fucking clue about the content they're writing. So while those two are having a fight that never actually happened according to canon, Ririva, a character that never should have existed, finally shows up at Owen's moisture farm. As she's sneaking around, Owen has the perfect opportunity to take her out at short range, but of course he misses, which leads to a few truly awful fight scenes between Ririva and Owen and Beru. Ririva has numerous chances to kill both of them, but for some reason she just knocks them to the ground instead. Oh, and in case you were super curious about how Uncle Owen got his limp, this is how. He falls off a catwalk and hits his leg on a box, and that's how he got his limp. So glad we learned where that came from.
Please clap.
But don't worry, it gets worse. This brings up one of the biggest plot holes in the entire series, possibly in all of Star Wars, because now we have a dark side Force user with a lightsaber chasing Luke Skywalker through the desert.
Oh no. Oh no.
Now, some of you out there might be thinking, you know, this seems like it might be kinda significant, like it might be an important event that Luke would remember for the rest of his life, and probably want to discuss with other people who know about the Force and just lightsabers in general. Perhaps one of those opportunities would be when Obiwan Kenobi gives Luke his father's lightsaber. It seems pretty much guaranteed that in that situation, Luke would bring up what happened to him before, where Obi-Wan says, "Hey, Luke, this is your father's lightsaber." And then Luke says, "Oh wow, the last time I saw one of these was when I was 10 years old, and a batshit crazy woman was chasing me through the desert." You don't think, maybe that kind of thing would be brought up?
Nah, it'll be fine.
Now, I realize that Disney and the writers on this show don't care about the lore of Star Wars. To the writers, I have to ask, what were you thinking? You stupid, worthless, no-talent hacks. What were you doing when you included this retcon? You have now irreparably changed the character of Luke Skywalker. He no longer fits into the original trilogy because of this change. This is not a small thing. This is a really big, shattering change, you absolute fucking clowns. What were you thinking?
The worst writing I've ever known on a television show.
But that right there is the answer, and also the root of a lot of these problems. They don't think. They don't think about the inconsistencies that they create. They don't think about the ramifications of a lot of these big retcon changes. They don't think about any of that because they don't care. They just want to have these big, exciting moments, and it doesn't really matter how it affects the story. They just want to go from one big, exciting moment to the next, and who cares about what happens in between?
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Anyways, the scene switches over and we find that Obi-Wan is still alive. Quick, everybody act surprised. This is one of the problems that I have with prequels, since you already know where all the characters are going to end up, provided that the writers don't do something and retcon it. There's never really any sense of real tension or danger, because again, we know that Obi-Wan's going to survive, so meh. As it turns out, Obi-Wan has been using the Force to hold all of the rocks above him, and finally, through the power of the flashback montage, he gets enough strength to push the rocks away.
We're gonna need a montage.
Vader has been walking back to his ship when he's suddenly attacked again by Obi-Wan, and as I pointed out already, Vader has a connection through the Force to Obi-Wan, so he would have already known that Obi-Wan was still alive, and the idea that Vader is somehow surprised by it is nonsense. But don't worry, it gets worse. During the fight, Obi-Wan has numerous opportunities to finish off Vader, but the writers didn't know how to handle this, so of course they just do it in the dumbest way possible. Obi-Wan strikes Vader with his lightsaber several times, except he uses the mechanical part instead of the saber itself.
Oh my god, it's like, I don't know, do you laugh or do you cry?
Although I don't know why he didn't just use the energy part. After all, the Grand Inquisitor survived it, and Ririva survived it twice.
How embarrassing.
He also manages to severely damage Vader's suit, take off half of his mask, and then knock him down. But instead of, following up the attack and finishing off Vader, Obi-Wan just kind of walks away a little bit and then decides to strike a pose. Because he's a moron. Also want to point out that the half-mask thing isn't even creative or original because they already did it in one of the cartoon shows. However, upon seeing Anakin's face, Obi-Wan has a nice little cry to himself, and then he walks away with probably the most unsatisfying conclusion to any fight in Star Wars history.
Oh, you can smell the shit from 5 miles away.
Back on the bestest planet ever, Tatooine, Ririva is still chasing down Luke when she uses the Force to pull him off a cliff, where he bonks his head and gets knocked out. Now, it's pretty obvious that the writers did this in order to try to cover up for the idea of Luke having an interaction with the Force users before talking to Ben Kenobi during A New Hope. However, the problem with this is that while Luke was escaping from the farm, he absolutely saw Ririva using a red lightsaber, and he was also pulled off the cliff by someone using the Force. So even if he's unconscious when Ririva is standing over him with the saber, it doesn't matter because it doesn't erase the fact that he already saw the lightsaber and the Force powers.
That ought to do it. Thanks very much, Ray.
Also, Ririva has only the most bare bones of rationale for wanting to hurt Luke. She doesn't know that Luke is Anakin's son. Instead, she thinks that Luke is important to Obi-Wan, and I guess she wants to make Obi-Wan suffer since he wasn't able to stop Order 66 or something. But I don't know why, because he worked with her and he was willing to almost sacrifice himself in order to help her get revenge on Vader. But now she's still big mad at Obi-Wan, so she goes after Luke because she kind of thinks that maybe he has a connection. What is this garbage? However, before she strikes Luke with the lightsaber, she changes her mind through the wonderful power of the flashback montage.
That's called a montage!
But don't worry, it gets worse. Obi-Wan gets a feeling through the Force that Luke is in danger and jumps to hyperspace to get to Tatooine, the bestest planet ever, in about, 3 seconds or so. I mean, seriously, this puts the Kessel Run to shame. I'm not even kidding. This is the fastest traveling ever in the history of Star Wars. Obi-Wan gets the sense that Luke is in danger and then is able to land on Tatooine, the bestest planet ever, and locate Luke and Ririva in less time than it takes Ririva to pick up Luke and then carry him to the moisture farm.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
She gives Luke back to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and then it's Ririva's turn to sit down and have a good cry. Ririva says that she failed because she wasn't able to save her friends in the temple like 10 years ago, and Obi-Wan responds with something that is just mind-numbingly stupid. He says that she didn't fail them, that instead she has honored them.
What are you talking about?
I'm sorry, what? She's honored them? By doing what? By hunting down and killing the other Padawans that escaped Order 66?
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
Is she's honoring the others? What? What? Ririva spent the last 10 years killing Jedi. Who knows how many other countless innocent people as well? How much of an idiot do you have to be to think that this would in any way balance the scales?
You know how much I sacrificed?
This is a completely unearned redemption that the writers just gave to her. But don't worry, it gets worse. Back on Mustafar, Vader is talking with Palpatine, and he says the next time he won't let Obi-Wan escape. But Palpatine scolds him, essentially saying that his feelings and his anger have made Vader weaker.
That's not how the Force works.
Which once again shows that the writers have no fucking clue what they're doing. It's the Jedi that teach their Padawans to have an emotional disconnect and to be more neutral. The dark side, and Sith in particular, emphasize using your emotions, and in fact things like hate, anger, and rage will amplify the strength of the dark side powers.
I can feel your anger. Let the hate flow through you. Your hate has made you powerful.
It makes no sense whatsoever for Palpatine to suggest otherwise. However, we do get a painfully accurate line of dialogue from Vader as a response. He says that Obiwan Kenobi means nothing, which as it turns out is probably one of the best ways to describe this entire series.
Ironic.
Back on the most important planet in the galaxy, Obi-Wan packs up all his stuff and heads over to the moisture farm. Here he gets to meet Luke for the first time, and we get a double dose of nostalgia bait. Not only does he deliver the "hello there" line, but he also gives Luke the toy ship that we will see Luke playing with years later at the start of A New Hope. But don't worry, it gets worse. It's about to get so much worse. Because apparently Obi-Wan is not going to be looking over Luke anymore. Remember, he packed up all his stuff and he left his little cave home, and now he seems to be traveling somewhere else. So I guess he just kind of gave up on the whole protect Luke thing. And it gets even dumber because as he's traveling through the desert, he suddenly sees a Force ghost materialize out of nowhere, and it turns out to be Qui-Gon Jinn. So we now know what character Disney plans on ruining next. As we've already seen, the writers on the show seem to be determined to destroy as much canon as they possibly can, and this is no exception. There's a reason why Qui-Gon never appeared as a Force ghost at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Here's something said by George Lucas himself. He says, and I quote, "We never see the ghost of Qui-Gon. He's not that accomplished. He's able to retain his personality, but he's not able to become a corporeal ghost." End quote. At this point, it really shouldn't come as much of a surprise that Disney would ignore canon in order to throw out some cheap nostalgia bait. I'm not even sure what to say about this series. Somehow they managed to make it worse with each and every episode where they either ignored existing canon or just destroyed it completely. This series has done just as much damage to continuity as The Last Jedi, and in some ways it did even more because it retconned important events with major characters. Putting aside the problems with the CGI and dialogue, there's also an absurd situation of characters just teleporting to different parts of the galaxy because the plot needs them to, or because an episode ends. There is no care or concern for consistency, for the lore, for the characters, or for Star Wars in general. And of course, let's not forget the constant attacks on fans by Disney themselves, claiming that anyone who doesn't like this series is an ist or a phobe. Well, guess what, Disney? Fuck you. That doesn't work anymore. Star Wars fans don't like your show because it's fucking garbage made by people who don't give a shit about Star Wars. But it doesn't seem like they're going to learn their lesson, because now it looks like Obiwan Kenobi is going to get a second season, and it also appears that Riri is going to get her own show, which is probably gonna end up being the equivalent of Batwoman in space, and I look forward to tearing it apart for the absolute dumpster fire that we know it will all be. But for now, that's the end of the first season of Obiwan Kenobi.